JFK International Airport, Terminal 7. Normal noise, normal crowds. Nothing special, right up until the police dog stopped dead. Officer Luke Harrington felt the leash snap tight. 1 second Kaiser trotted at his side. The next, the German shepherd turned rigid. Eyes locked on a single black suitcase drifting along the baggage carousel. "Kaiser," Luke said under his breath. The dog's ears speared forward, his lips peeled back. Then he launched. He hit the belt with a roar that silenced the terminal. The suitcase flew off, skidding across the tiles. Coffee splashed. A child screamed. Phones clattered everywhere, as somebody shouted the word that detonates panic in any airport. Bomb! Travelers scattered, abandoning bags and boarding passes. A woman dragged her kid behind a column. Security half drew their weapons, caught between procedure and the animal that would not let that suitcase go. "Kaiser, heel!" Luke yanked the leash hard enough to sting. Kaiser did not move. A steady growl rolled out of his chest. Nose welded to one corner of the case like something inside it pulsed. In 6 years together, he had never given a false alert. Not once. A pale man in an expensive coat stepped forward, hands high. "It's mine," he blurted. "It's just clothes." Scan. Bomb squad rolled in. X-ray. Monitors. Tight faces. No explosives. Clean image. "All clear," the tech called. Relief rippled through the room, except around the dog. Kaiser whined once, then slammed his paw against the base so hard the plastic cracked. That tiny sound of protest froze Luke more than any siren. They popped the locks, lifted the lining, and found the first thing the scanner had missed. And when a woman in a red coat at the edge of the crowd smiled at Kaiser like she recognized him, then turned and vanished into the bodies rushing past, Luke understood this wasn't a false alarm. It was the opening move in an invisible war aimed at airports just like this one. If you want to see how far it really went, tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, because the next step of this story could just as easily have begun with your suitcase. Luke Harrington had not planned his life around airport terminals, but after the divorce they were the only places that felt clear. People moved in organized chaos, and if something was wrong, there were procedures to follow. Compared to lawyers and empty nights in a too-quiet apartment, patrolling polished tiles with a dog at his side felt almost sane that day. Kaiser arrived in his world as an 18-month-old problem. The black and tan German shepherd had blown through handlers, chewed 3 leashes in a week, and earned himself a reputation at the Canine Academy as too much. When Luke first took the rope clipped to his harness, Kaiser hit the end of it like a launched missile, teeth flashing, paws skidding in the dirt. Most people flinched. Luke didn't. He locked his stance, let the pressure burn into his palm, and waited. The dog expected anger, shouting and yanks. What he got instead was a man who held his ground and spoke in a low, steady tone. "You fight everything, huh?" Luke murmured. "I get it, but if you stick with me, we're going to put that fight somewhere it belongs." The next few weeks were a tug-of-war between chaos and discipline. Kaiser ignored sits and downs, lunged at blowing plastic bags, and once tried to drag an entire bite sleeve off the training field. Yet when the instructors hid trace explosives, something changed. The dog's wild energy narrowed to a single line, nose down, tail level. He followed scent trails through hallways and stairwells, stopping exactly where the training samples lay. One night during a scenario drill, a decoy in a padded suit charged from a doorway, shouting. Kaiser jolted, eyes wide, then flicked a look back at Luke. It was small, barely a heartbeat long, but Luke felt the question in it. "Are you with me?" He gave a single nod. Kaiser surged forward, hit the decoy cleanly, held until commanded to release, then sat, chest heaving, ears pricked. The instructor wrote one word in his file that evening: potential. From there, their partnership hardened into habit. Luke learnt the tiny shifts in Kaiser's posture that meant curiosity, the rigid line that meant danger, and the softening that appeared only when the dog rested his head against Luke's leg off duty. Kaiser learnt that Luke did not quit, did not vanish, and did not hand him off when things got difficult. In a life where people had walked away, that consistency mattered more than either of them knew how to say. When they were finally assigned to JFK International, the staff got used to the sight of them fast. Luke in his dark uniform, expression neutral, Kaiser in his canine vest, moving with contained power. Baggage handlers relaxed when they appeared near a suspicious shipment. TSA agents radioed for them when a scan looked odd but not quite wrong. He earned the nickname the machine with a heartbeat, because scanners missed things, and Kaiser did. He found a block of plastic explosive wrapped in nappies in a stroller frame, and the terminal evacuated quietly before anyone brandished a phone. He stopped dead in front of a stack of children's toys that turned out to be packed with heroin. Once, he fixed on a glittering designer purse, unmoving until an officer opened it to reveal a live cobra coiled beneath silk. Years of that life blurred together. Shifts, sweeps, and early morning patrols when the sky outside the glass was still indigo. Luke's calendar was less about holidays, and more about rotation schedules and incoming flight patterns. The only constant was the feel of the leash in his hand, and the presence of 90+ pounds of fur and muscle at his side. That morning Terminal 7 was swollen with travelers. Holiday traffic had started early, swelling every line and filling every seat. Luggage wheels rattled over tile, boarding calls layered over each other from distant gates. The air smelt of espresso, damp coats, jet fuel, and nerves. Kaiser moved at an easy trot, harness snug. To a casual observer he looked almost relaxed, glancing here and there, letting kids admire him as they passed. Luke knew better. Relaxed for Kaiser meant his radar was still spinning, cataloging every cent, waiting for something to stand out. Near the duty-free store, Officer Ramirez slid into step beside them, coffee in hand, tie already loosened. "Morning, Harrington. Morning, superstar," he said. "You boys ready to ruin somebody's day in the name of national security?" Luke allowed himself a small smile. "He's ready. I just carry his water," Ramirez snorted. "The dog gets the glory. The handler gets the paperwork. You really picked the wrong species." The conversation flowed around Kaiser like water around stone. The dog did not break focus. His head moved in small arcs, sampling air currents as they drifted toward the baggage claim level. Down there the atmosphere changed again. Arrivals always felt different from departures. People leaned forward instead of pacing. Tension pooled around the carousels, as travelers watched for the first slice of rubber to spit out their belongings. A monitor above Carousel 4 listed incoming luggage from Berlin and London. The belt jerked, then began to move. Suitcases slid into view, red hard shells, soft duffels, and silver cases wrapped in plastic. Tags flapped. Children craned their necks to spot cartoon-printed bags. Kaiser's nose twitched as each one passed. Sometimes he took half a step closer, then dismissed whatever he smelt and kept going. Ramirez checked the screen. "Berlin bags," he said. "Have you ever wanted to go there?" "I see enough airports right here," Luke replied, scanning the crowd. He watched hands, eyes and posture. A man in a camel coat checked his watch over and over. A young woman in headphones bounced her knee, gaze unfocused. A woman clutched a stuffed bear to her chest like it was breathing. All of it looked like ordinary stress pressed into different shapes. Kaiser dropped half a pace behind him. The change was slight, but Luke felt it through the leash, as surely as if someone had tugged his sleeve. The shepherd's tail lowered. His ears tipped forward, losing their lazy swivel. His nostrils flared as he drew in a deeper breath, chest expanding against the harness. Luke's fingers tightened. "What do you have, buddy?" he murmured. The dog's body gathered itself, a casual trot bleeding away into coiled readiness. His mouth closed, panting halted. A ridge of fur lifted along his spine, small but unmistakable to someone who had spent years reading him. The noise of the terminal slid to the background, smoothed into a meaningless hum. The first sound from Kaiser was more vibration than voice, a low growl that started somewhere deep in his ribs and traveled up the leash into Luke's bones. The shepherd's weight shifted forward. Every muscle looked ready to spring. "Kaiser," Luke said quietly, equal parts warning and permission. The leash drew taut. A black suitcase rolled into view on the carousel, medium-sized, scuffed, with an ordinary airline tag hanging limp from the hand. To everyone else around Carousel 4, it was just another bag in the river. To Kaiser it was the only thing in the world, and the dog exploded. Kaiser's bark did not just echo through Terminal 7, it split the entire hall in half. One heartbeat earlier, the baggage claim had been a familiar blur of rolling wheels, overlapping announcements, and tired voices. The next, every sound seemed to jump back, as the German shepherd hit the end of his leash and launched at the black suitcase like a fired round. His front paws slammed onto the conveyor belt, claws scraping the rubber with a harsh, grating rasp. The sudden pull jerked Luke forward, dragging him several stumbling steps. Kaiser's body surged upward, jaws opening wide, teeth flashing under the fluorescent lights. He snapped at the suitcase handle, missed it by an inch, and his weight knocked the bag sideways. The case wobbled on the moving belt, tipped, then tumbled off the edge and hit the floor with a heavy crack before skidding across the tiles. The people nearest them reacted before they even processed why. A woman standing right by the belt screamed, the sound high and raw. A man jerked away, his paper cup flipping from his hand, a sheet of hot coffee arcing through the air and splashing over his shoes. A toddler strapped in a stroller started wailing as the stroller lurched sideways when the mother yanked it away from the barking dog. A rolling carry-on spun out of control and bumped into someone's leg. Phones slipped from fingers and clattered on stone. Kaiser, Luke dug his boots in, feeling the braided leash burn across his palm like a live wire. He snapped, the word sharp with the kind of authority that usually cut through anything. The command might as well have evaporated between them. Kaiser did not turn his head. He did not even flick an ear. His entire world had narrowed to the overturned suitcase lying on the shiny floor. He dropped his nose to the plastic shell, inhaled in a long, dragging breath, then let it out as a low, continuous growl that seemed to vibrate up the lid into Luke's chest. The dog raked his paws along the side of the case, claws scratching hard enough to leave pale lines across the dark material. He snapped near the zipper, teeth clicking together with ugly force. Every muscle in his body was aimed forward in a straight, rigid line. There was no uncertainty in him, no hesitation. Everything about his posture said the same thing: danger. People started moving in earnest. Bodies jerked back from the carousel, leaving a widening ring of empty space around the dog and the bag. Someone yanked a partner by the sleeve so hard the person nearly fell. A suitcase rolled away on its own, spinning on its wheels until it bumped a column and stopped. Voices spiked into the air, overlapping questions, curses, frightened exclamations, until the whole space sounded like a single rising shout. Then one word cut through all of it: bomb. It came from somewhere in the scattering crowd, more reflex than information. It did not matter where it started. The moment it left that person's mouth, the entire baggage hall seemed to inhale at once. Conversations snapped off mid-sentence. Faces went gray. Instinct rolled over reason. A man grabbed his partner's hand and pulled him toward the nearest exit, leaving their half-unloaded suitcase stranded on the belt. A woman scooped her child into her arms so fast the little shoe popped off and was left behind on the floor. A group of students backed away in a ragged cluster, still holding their phones up to record even as their hands shook. Above them, the terminal speakers chimed. A boarding call cut off in the middle of a sentence. Red strobes along the ceiling began to pulse, washing the white tile in rhythmic flashes. A harsh alarm joined the noise, mechanical and relentless. "Attention," the recorded voice announced. "Please clear the baggage area, immediately. Follow instructions from airport personnel." Security officers were already moving. Uniformed tasks from nearby posts converged on Carousel 4, hands hovering near holsters, eyes fixed on Kaiser and the suitcase. One officer spread his arms wide, driving people back with firm shoves and short commands. Another snapped bright yellow tape between pillars, building a boundary around the scene with quick, practiced motions. Luke shifted on instinct to put his own body between Kaiser and everyone else. His grip cinched tighter around the leash until his knuckles ached. His heart hammered hard enough to feel in his throat, but his focus remained steady. Kaiser did not give casual alerts. In 6 years of working together, the dog's nose had never failed him. His radio crackled at his shoulder, loud even over the alarm. "Unit 8, report. Dispatch. We're seeing alarms and crowd movement in Terminal 7. What's your status?" Kai 9 alert on a black roller bag at Carousel 4, Luke answered, eyes never leaving his partner. Strong response. Sustained. Possible device. Initiate bomb protocol and clear the level. Copy. Possible device, came the immediate reply. Bomb squad en route. All nearby units. Assist with evacuation and secure the perimeter. Push them farther back. Ramirez shouted to 2 younger officers who were trying to argue with a businessman demanding to reach his suitcase. "Nobody goes near that belt until the techs say it's clean." As if pulled in by the word suitcase, a man in a camel-colored coat slipped through a gap in the tape with his hands raised high. He was pale, breathing hard, with hair plastered damply to his forehead. "That's my bag," he yelled, voice cracking on the last word. "I just landed from London. It's clothes, that's all. Shirts, shoes, some gifts. There is no bomb." Kaiser spun toward the sound and unleashed a bark so fierce it felt like a physical shove, lips peeled from white teeth, saliva flying as he snapped at the air. The man recoiled, stumbling backward so fast he almost tripped over an abandoned suitcase. "Sir," behind the line, Ramirez barked, catching his arm and dragging him to safety. "If it's yours, you'll get it back when it's safe." "I swear I didn't put anything dangerous in there," the traveler insisted, voice climbing higher with each word. "I packed it myself. Nothing illegal, nothing violent. Please, it's everything I own right now." Luke heard him, but Kaiser had already dismissed the man. The dog wrenched his body back toward the suitcase, dragging Luke half a step despite the braced stance. He dropped his nose to the same corner near the base, inhaled in a hard pull, then let out a short, furious bark that sounded almost like frustration. His hackles stood in a... His tail was a straight rod. Every muscle shook with contained drive. An officer at Luke's shoulder swallowed. "You think he's just feeding off the panic," he muttered, trying to sound casual and failing. "Smelling adrenaline, noise, something like that." Luke shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "He knows what he's picking up." He had seen Kaiser track explosives through crowded cargo holds, detect narcotics folded inside toys, and scent a live snake through layers of leather and perfume. The dog did not panic. He simply alerted when there was something real. Seeing this level of intensity now made the air feel heavy in Luke's lungs. Bomb technicians pushed into the cleared space with a wheeled cart loaded with hard cases and a compact X-ray unit. Their vests thudded as they moved. One of them scanned the scene. Dog, bag, sweating man at the tape, circling officers, shivering crowd, and then locked onto Luke. "Handler, can you hold your canine there?" she called over the wail of the alarm. "We need enough room to work." "I've got him," Luke replied, wrapping the leash once around his wrist for more leverage. The braided material bit into his skin as Kaiser strained against it, then dropped into a tense sit when Luke paired the position command with a crisp tug. Even seated, the shepherd's body was a coiled spring aimed at the suitcase. Beyond the tape, evacuated passengers hovered at a distance, a sea of anxious faces and raised screens. Some obeyed instructions and lowered their phones. Others kept filming, pulled between fear and the need to capture whatever might happen next. The bomb squad began positioning the X-ray head, rolling the arm toward the fallen suitcase with slow, deliberate movement. Each adjustment seemed exaggerated, almost too careful in the flashing red light. To Luke, time narrowed to the length of the leash, and the gap between Kaiser's nose and the dark plastic shell on the floor. Have you ever trusted something you could not see more than what is right in front of you? Standing there under harsh airport lighting, Luke did. He trusted the tension humming through the dog's frame, and the steady growl under Kaiser's breath more than procedures, machines, or a stranger's desperate promises. As the X-ray unit lowered into place above the suitcase, Luke already knew one thing with absolute clarity: his partner was not overreacting. Kaiser had found something. The rest of the airport was only just starting to realize. Yellow tape snapped into place around Carousel 4, bright plastic cutting the baggage hall into two worlds. Outside, confused travelers whispering and filming. Inside, hard faces, clipped orders, and one black suitcase that had stopped an entire terminal. Officers stretched the tape from pillar to pillar, forming a clean perimeter while the belt shuddered to a halt, trapped luggage piled behind the fallen roller case like a frozen river. The bomb squad cart rattled over the tiles and slid to a stop near the bag. Metal cases, coiled cables, a portable X-ray unit folded down like some strange insect, all the gear nobody ever wanted to see used for real. The lead tech, a woman with a dark braid, tucked under her helmet, dropped to one knee beside the suitcase and measured the distance with a quick, practiced glance. Kaiser sat just off her shoulder, exactly where Luke had placed him. On paper his posture was perfect. Hindquarters tucked, front paws planted, head steady. Up close though, he looked like a live wire. Muscles trembled under sleek fur. His ears were pinned toward the bag, his nostrils working non-stop. A low growl vibrated in his chest, too soft for the crowd to hear over the alarm, but loud enough through the leash that Luke felt it buzz in his bones. Beyond the tape line, people huddled together in nervous clumps. A mother clutched her child, one hand over tiny ears. A businessman, still gripping his briefcase, Filmed with his phone anyway. A group of students whispered guesses to each other, eyes locked on the dog. Even from a distance Luke could read their faces, half expecting a dramatic TV-style explosion, half hoping this would all turn out to be nothing. The man who claimed the suitcase stood between two officers near a support column. His camel coat hung open, shirt collar damp with sweat. A Navy passport wallet shook slightly in his hand. They'd already checked it. Daniel Croft, British. Arrived from London that morning. Right now the document didn't matter as much as the wild flicker in his eyes. Every time Kaiser growled, "I swear it's just souvenirs," Croft said, voice cracking down the middle. "Clothes, sweets, a few books, that's all, I promise. I'd never bring anything dangerous through security." "Sir, for your own safety, stay where you are," one officer replied without looking at him. "If it's really just shirts and candy, you'll get it back. Let them do their job." The technician raised the X-ray head on its arm and lowered it over the suitcase, lining it up with quiet precision. She glanced up at Luke. "Hander, I need him steady," she said. "Close, but no contact." "He'll hold," Luke answered, tightening his grip on the leash and resting his other hand on Kaiser's shoulder. The dog's skin twitched under his fingers like there was a current running through him, but he didn't break position, eyes still locked on the suitcase as if the rest of the airport had ceased to exist. The tech tapped a series of buttons on a small control pad. The unit buzzed, and a blinking image blossomed onto the portable monitor clipped to the cart. The inside of the suitcase rendered in flat gray. Folded fabric formed soft blocks. Two solid rectangles hugged one side, likely books. A cluster of rounded shapes suggested bottles and a toiletry kit. She leaned closer, tracing outlines with her gaze. "Okay," she said slowly. "No obvious device. No wiring. No detonator structure. Nothing shaped like a charge. I'm seeing dense clothing, a toiletry bag, and a couple of hard covers. Looks like standard packing." Ramirez, standing just inside the tape, let out a long breath. "So no bomb," he called. "Tell me the dog just ruined some tourist's laundry day." "From this angle, no explosives detected," the technician announced. "We still follow protocol, but there's nothing here that matches an improvised device." The words rippled outward like a stone dropped into water. Shoulders eased. A few officers shifted their weight off the balls of their feet. Out beyond the line, someone laughed shakily, the sound almost a sob. A couple of passengers even clapped once or twice, relief making them foolish. Kaiser didn't move. If anything, the growl in his chest deepened. His lips lifted just enough to show the edge of a tooth. He leaned toward the suitcase, adding pressure against the harness, as if an invisible rope was pulling him straight at that one corner of plastic. Luke felt the change instantly. His forearm vibrated with it. "Easy boy," he murmured, dropping into a crouch beside him. The alarm wailed, lights flashed and people muttered, but down here there were only two living creatures and one battered suitcase between them. "What is it? Show me." Kaiser lowered his snout until it almost brushed the floor. He inhaled slowly along the base of the suitcase, following the seam where the molded shell met the frame. Then he gave a sharp, frustrated whine, a sound Luke had heard only a handful of times in their years together, and raked one paw along that exact line, claws screeching across plastic. The technician turned her head. "He's still agitated," she said. "Adrenaline. It happens." Luke shook his head. "No, if it was just spillover, he'd be sniffing everything. He's locked on one spot." He rose and stepped closer to the monitor. The gray image stared back at him. Fabric, books, bottles, normal, ordinary, harmless. Everything the machine showed said relax. Everything the dog's body shouted said don't. "Can you hit just the bottom again?" he asked. "Angle it so you're cutting through the floor." "He's not reacting to shirts, he's reacting to whatever's under them." She frowned. "The system's already given us a clear image. We try not to run unnecessary passes." "In 6 years," Luke said quietly, "he has never stayed like this on a clean bag. Not one. If he's still pushing, we're missing something." "Please." Bottom panel. There was a beat of hesitation, a small war between protocol and the living. Growling argument pressed against Luke's leg. Then the technician nodded. "All right," she said, adjusting angle, increasing penetration. "Nobody move." She tilted the X-ray head downward, shifting it a few centimeters toward the suitcase base, and keyed in new settings. The machine buzzed again, deeper this time. On the screen, the image flickered, then reformed. She zoomed in on the lower third of the case, fingers dancing over the controls to sharpen contrast. Layers of clothing resolved into clearer blocks, bottles into neat circles. Beneath them, where the suitcase shell should have shown as a single solid band, a darker shape lurked, a thin rectangle running flat along the bottom, separate from the frame. "There," she murmured. Ramirez edged closer, careful not to cut across Kaiser's line of sight. "Talk to me," he said. "What am I seeing?" She pointed at the shadow. "That extra line," she replied. "Standard molding gives you one layer at the floor. This has two. Wrong thickness for padding, wrong density for the exterior shell. That's a false bottom." The fragile relief in the room shattered like glass. Officers straightened as if yanked by invisible strings. Hands drifted back toward weapons and radio. Outside the tape, the nervous chatter died mid-sentence. Even the people recording lowered their phones a fraction, suddenly aware that the story unfolding might be bigger than a harmless scare. Daniel Croft went the color of copy paper. His knees seemed to soften. He stared at the monitor as though it were accusing him personally. I don't know how that got there," he stammered. "I never asked anyone to change the suitcase. I bought it off the rack. I didn't hide anything. I swear to you." "You can explain that later in an interview room," Ramirez said, eyes hard. "Right now that case is telling us more truth than you are." Luke barely heard them. He was watching Kaiser. The dog's gaze was still welded to the same spot, the same line along the base the second scan had just exposed. His growl thrummed on, steady, unbroken. The machine had needed a second chance, and a deeper look to notice what his nose had screamed about from the first breath. Imagine understanding, in a single instant, that the animal at your side has just seen past every comforting assumption, every clean image, every hopeful sigh. That was the moment the real silence fell over terminals. The alarm still shrieked, engines still rumbled outside, and lights still pulsed red and white, yet under all of it lay a heavier quiet. Whatever hid beneath that false bottom, Kaiser had found it first. They moved the suitcase to the blast-resistant containment zone at the far end of the hall, wheels rattling over tile while the yellow tape line held back a restless sea of travelers. Officers flanked the cart, hands resting near holsters, eyes fixed on the scuffed black shell that had turned a normal sweep into something sharp and dangerous. Through all of it, Kaiser trotted at Luke's side, gaze glued to the luggage, muscles tight, as if some invisible leash tied his heartbeat to whatever hid inside. Inside the marked circle on the floor, the bomb technicians took over. The same woman who had read the X-ray knelt beside the suitcase, thick blast gloves making every motion deliberate. She eased the latches open, lifted the lid a fraction, waited, then raised it fully. Shirts, trousers, rolled socks, sweaters and a toiletry kit lay exactly where the scan had placed them. To anyone glancing quickly, it looked boring, almost disappointingly ordinary. "Clothes first," she said. "Strip it down to the shell." Another tech joined her. Together they lifted garments, piece by piece, dropping each item into a labeled evidence bag. Bottles clinked inside the toiletry pouch, a brief waft of aftershave cutting through the sterile smell of disinfectant and cold metal. When the last sweater went into a bag, only the inner lining remained. From above it looked normal, but the tech wrapped her knuckle along the base, and felt the faint spongy give that should not have been there. "There's our fake floor," she murmured. "Handler, keep your dog back. If something's wired under this, I don't want his nose over it." Luke shortened the leash. Kaiser shifted closer against his leg, unresisting but coiled. His ears pointed toward the suitcase, nostrils working, a low vibration rolling out of his chest. Even with alarms down to a pulsing tone, and announcements resuming in the distance, the shepherd did not blink. The tech slid a slim tool under the interior panel, and worked it along the seam. Plastic creaked, and glue popped in sticky bursts. Slowly the sheet lifted. She folded it back like a trapdoor, revealing a cramped cavity packed with objects that had no business riding under socks. "Passport Farm," the second tech breathed. Dozens of booklets lay stacked in tight rows, their covers stamped with different national crests. At first glance they looked genuine, yet Luke saw tiny flaws even from a few steps away. Color just off, font slightly wrong, laminates half a millimeter misaligned. Between the stacks, rubber bands cinched bundles of money, euros, dollars, pounds, yen and notes Luke did not immediately recognize. Each roll had been wrapped tight for quick handoffs in alleyways and hotel lobbies far from camera. Clear sleeves filled with SIM cards sat beside the cash, wafer-thin rectangles waiting for burner phones. Several compact USB drives lined the back edge, metal casings dull under fluorescent light. No logos, No stickers, no markings, just blank devices whose silence felt more threatening than any visible weapon. Behind Luke, Ramirez let out a long, low whistle. "This isn't narcotics," he said quietly. "This is infrastructure. Somebody built a traveling identity factory." At the tape line, Daniel Croft's face drained of color. Sweat darkened his collar and gathered at his hairline. His passport wallet shook in his hand as he watched the technicians lift passports and money into trays. "Someone must have switched luggage," he blurted. "You don't understand. I book flights. I sit in boardrooms. I manage spreadsheets. I don't run forged documents. They must have swapped bags at security, or on the belt, or before you ever reached the airport." Ramirez cut in. "Either way, your name is the one on the tag." Kaiser's growl deepened, drawing glances from nearby officers. His tail stretched straight behind him, rigid, claws scraping once against the front edge of the suitcase. Instead of focusing on the opened cavity, his head angled slightly toward the inner wall, his nose tracing a line where plastic met the frame. Luke followed the shift immediately. He lowered himself beside the dog, eyes tracking along the same arc. At first the interior seemed standard, molded shell, stitched fabric, nothing unusual. Then he saw it, a hairline break running along the base, too straight to be random, too precise for a manufacturing defect. If Kaiser had not pointed him there, he might have missed it completely. "Hold on," Luke said. "Right along this joint. That doesn't look like factory work." The tech leaned in, adjusting her headlamp. "Could be another compartment," she agreed. "We open it, we do it slow." Luke slipped a slim folding knife from his pocket and flicked the blade open. At her nod he slid the tip into the almost invisible gap and twisted gently. Adhesive cracked in tiny snaps. He inched along the length of the seam, feeling each soft give under his hand. By the time he reached the far corner, the panel loosened enough for the tech to grab the edge with her gloved fingers. She pulled. The inner wall swung outward on a hidden hinge, exposing a second chamber, narrower yet even more meticulously organized than the first. Foam slots held rows of microchips, no larger than fingernails, each stamped with codes that meant nothing to Luke yet radiated importance. Beside them rested slimmer drives different from the earlier batch, casings etched with partially scratched serial numbers. Clear envelopes contained printed biometric templates, faces, numerical strings, fingerprint segments and iris maps, all cataloged with mechanical precision. Along the side sat a stack of plastic access cards, branded with airline and airport logo. Each carried a photo, a name, a barcode, a magnetic strip and a clearance level. To a casual observer, they would look like ordinary employee badges. To anyone who understood secure facilities, they represented master keys to doors that should never open for strangers. The tech exhaled slowly. "Microelectronics, biometrics, staff credentials," she said. "With this kit, someone could ghost into restricted zones from baggage tunnels to boarding bridges. Not just here, everywhere these carriers operate." The cold weight in Luke's stomach dropped further. This was no local scam, no small-time courier stunt. It was architecture designed to tunnel under systems millions of people depended on every single day. Behind them, Croft's legs wobbled. An officer caught his elbow as he sagged against the pillar. The bravado and the frantic explanations all drained out at once. "She told me it was just information movement," he whispered, staring at the chips and cards. "Encrypted archives, anonymous transit, nothing that would ever touch real people. She said I'd never know the contents. That ignorance kept me safe. Just data transfer," she promised. "Just numbers." Luke turned, every nerve sharpened. "Who promised you that?" he asked. Croft lifted his head. Terror burnt through the sweat and denial. "The woman who hired me," he said. "The one in the red coat. She's here in this terminal. She's been watching us the entire time." Luke's gaze snapped toward the glass wall beyond the tape, scanning reflections and faces for a flash of crimson fabric. Kaiser's ears flicked, nostrils flaring, as if he too felt eyes pressing in from somewhere just beyond the circle of light and noise. Luke spun so fast, his radio cord snapped tight against his shoulder. Beyond the shifting bodies and glare on the tall glass, one figure stood completely still, a woman in a blood-red coat, the color sharp as a warning flare, blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun, chin lifted, eyes locked not on Luke or any officer, but on Kaiser. The German shepherd sensed her before Luke's mind processed details. His head whipped toward the window, pupils wide, ears speared forward. For one suspended heartbeat, he froze, as if instinct had pinned him to the floor. Then he detonated. Kaiser lunged, barking so violently the sound punched through the terminal. He dragged Luke 2 hard steps before the handler found his balance. Claws hammered tile, then scraped metal as he launched at the glass. Front paws, slamming the pane with a dull thud. Teeth flashed, lips peeled, and every hair along his back lifted. On the other side, the woman did not flinch. Her expression almost softened, a small amused curve at one corner of her mouth. She tilted her head, studying Kaiser the way someone evaluates a weapon. Luke felt her attention there, like a laser cutting straight through him. She shaped 2 silent words. Too late. Then she turned. The red coat spun as she moved, fabric flaring before she stepped behind a knot of travelers being guided toward the exit. 1 second she stood framed in glass. The next, that streak of color vanished into a sea of muted coats. Red coat, blonde, early 30s, heading north. Luke shouted, already running. He loosened the leash just enough to keep Kaiser from choking and sprinted after him, boots hammering the floor. Kaiser shot forward like a round, leaving a barrel. Claws skittered on polished stone, then bit, driving him down the concourse. Passengers lurched aside, pressed against walls as the K9 thundered past. Clear the path, Ramirez yelled. Police K9 in pursuit. They flashed through duty-free, weaving between perfume islands and liquor towers. Luke caught a flicker of the red coat ahead, then lost it as the woman pivoted. She slipped between startled shoppers with unnerving accuracy, choosing lanes that kept her just beyond reach. When a cart blocked an aisle, she never slowed, cutting through a side passage that threaded between storage racks and staff doors. A route no tourist should have known. She's using blind spots, Luke gasped into his radio. Knows camera coverage. Kaiser hit the turn without hesitation. She followed scent, not sight. Perfume and something metallic hung in the air like a track. He hugged the corner so tightly his rear paws slid. Then he corrected and surged down the corridor. A cleaning cart sat half out of a closet. Luke vaulted it. A worker in an orange vest flattened against the wall as the team ripped past. Ahead, a scrap of red cloth lay on the floor. A silk scarf, dropped like a marker, lay half crumpled near a rolling bin. Kaiser skidded long enough to shove his nose into the fabric. He inhaled once, deep, locking the scent. Then he whipped left without waiting for a word, yanking Luke toward a steel service door, stamped authorized personnel only. Kaiser, easy. Too late. The dog hit the crash bar with his chest. The door flew open, slamming the stopper with a hollow clang. Cold air knifed in. They burst onto the tarmac. Roaring engines, hard wind and white floodlights swallowed them. Jet fuel stung Luke's throat. Ground crews froze, staring as the K9 unit exploded from the building at a dead sprint. Rain had just begun, a wet sheen turning concrete slick. Kaiser barely noticed. He barreled across painted lines and fuel hoses, weaving past baggage carts and tow tractors, following the invisible river of scent burnt into his mind. Luke drove his legs harder, lungs burning, hand locked around the leash like an anchor. There, Ramirez shouted, pointing across the ramp. Far ahead, the woman in red climbed a maintenance ladder bolted to the skin of a low hanger. The coat flared behind her like a flash. Her movements were ruthlessly economical. No wasted steps, no hesitation on the wet rungs. Kaiser, up, Luke barked. The dog sprang at the ladder and scrambled upward, claws biting metal. Luke grabbed the rails and hauled himself after him, boots slipping on damp steps. By the time they reached the top landing, the woman had shoved open a heavy door. She disappeared inside, slamming it behind her. The panel boomed, cutting off the storm. Kaiser hit it a heartbeat later, his body slamming steel with a dull clang. He bounced back, then hurled himself against it again, barking himself hoarse. Luke seized the handle, felt resistance, and threw his shoulder into it. The latch shrieked. The door burst inward. They stumbled into a hangar. A cargo van idled near the far wall, exhaust curling toward rafters. Its rear doors gaped, revealing stacked crates held by straps. The woman in red stood beside the driver's door, coat now hanging open to show a dark fitted suit. Up close, her features were sharp, pale eyes that missed nothing, a faint line across one eyebrow, a composure more dangerous than any displayed weapon. She looked first at Kaiser, lips curving as if greeting a rival she had hoped to meet. "You're faster than I projected," she said, voice calm. "Most teams waste time arguing with scanners. You trusted the dog. Efficient." "K9, down," Luke snapped, dragging Kaiser to heel while his gaze swept the van. "Hands where I can see them. Now." She raised her palms to shoulder height, fingers loose, as though indulging him. The idling engine filled the space with a low vibration that matched the growl still rumbling in Kaiser's chest. "Here's your problem," she said, tilting her head. "You did almost everything right, but you're late. Phase 1 ended the moment he hit that suitcase. Phase 2 started before you cleared the terminal." Her right hand gave the slightest twitch. Something small and cylindrical slid from her sleeve into her palm. She snapped her wrist and sent it skittering across the floor between them. "Flat," Luke shouted, instinct forcing him to turn his face and drag Kaiser's head toward his leg. White drowned the world. Light exploded, brutal and absolute. It punched through his closed eyelids, erased depth, and flattened everything into a burning sound followed, a sharp crack, then a piercing whine that swallowed the engine noise and his own breath. The floor tilted. For a moment he felt cut loose, senses sliding. He held the leash with both hands until the vertigo shapes bled back. Gray concrete, a white van, steel beams and the bright rectangle of the open door. "Kaiser," he rasped, "with me." The shepherd shook once, ears flattened, then pressed against his leg, already scanning the hangar. The van still idle, its headlights washed over an empty patch of floor. The space beside the driver's door was bare. Luke staggered to the open bay and saw taillights already shrinking toward the far exit, the vehicle fishtailing on wet pavement. As it vanished into the rain-streaked dark, the crimson ghost had slipped away. The interrogation room felt smaller than ever, like the walls had crept in while they dragged Daniel Croft upstairs. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, throwing hard light on a metal table scarred by dents and rings from old cups. Croft sat on one side, cuffs linking his wrists to a steel loop, shirt wrinkled, hair flattened with sweat. The camel coat and polished watch that had made him look successful downstairs were now tagged as evidence. Luke took the chair opposite, boots planted, forearms on the edge. He laced his fingers so he would not give in to the urge to shake answers out of the man across from him. In the corner, a camera blinked red, recording every word. Kaiser lay near the door, head on his paws, eyes half closed, but anyone who knew him could see the tension in his muscles. "Start from the top," Luke said. "No omissions. Who set up that suitcase?" Croft stared at the mirrored wall, watching his own reflection instead of the handler. The confident traveler who had breezed through customs earlier was gone. What remained was a man with blotchy cheeks, reddened eyes and hands that couldn't quite stop shaking. "I didn't build anything," he muttered. "I carried things. Flights, meetings, hotel lobbies." She called it logistics work. High pay, low risk. "I told myself I was just a courier." "Who's courier?" Luke asked. "Name." It took a moment for Croft's throat to cooperate. "Victoria Hale," he said at last. "Former intelligence officer." She said her old employers were too slow. "She sees patterns in border controls, ticketing and access points. Where other people see security, she sees seams you can pick apart." Luke had already seen her in the hangar doorway, pale eyes steady, red coat bright against gray metal. Hearing the name only made the image sharper. "What did she have you carry?" he pressed. "Not the cover story. The truth." Croft wet his lips. His cuffs clinked. "You opened the hidden compartments," he said. "You saw part of it. The passports are high-grade forgeries for long-term identities. The cash bankrolls jobs that can't leave a digital trail. The drives and chips are the important cargo. They hold cloned passenger records pulled in real time from airport scanners and reservation systems. Facial templates, fingerprints, travel routes, payment data, and frequent flyer profiles. She mirrors it while it's moving, before it settles into storage, and then sells it," Luke said. "To whoever pays best," Croft whispered. "Organized crime groups, black market brokers, extremist outfits, private intelligence fronts. Once they buy a batch, they can stitch together complete identities that look legitimate at every checkpoint you use." For a moment Luke felt slightly off balance, as if the floor had dropped a fraction of an inch. Passengers trusted that scanners and databases filtered threats out. Someone had turned that faith into a catalog for sale. You walked that hardware through my terminal, he said. You let her piggyback on the systems we guard. I kept telling myself it was only information, Croft said. No explosives, no guns, nothing that would physically hurt anyone. She promised that I would never be near a bomb. I clung to that. It let me sleep. Luke leaned close. You still knew it was wrong. Croft shut his eyes. I knew, he admitted. I chose not to follow the implication. When you pried open that second compartment and I saw employee badges, biometric templates, and crew credentials, I finally understood she wasn't just cloning passengers anymore. She was building keys for the people who move behind the scenes. That's when the story I told myself cracked. You mentioned phases, Luke said. We stopped one suitcase today. How many runs did she complete before this? Croft's shoulders sagged. Dozens, he said. Different airports, rotating couriers, varied routes. We never carried everything at once. She called it redundancy. Lose one shipment. Others keep the network alive. I handled certain legs. Never the full chain. Luke felt anger flare, then forced his voice to stay even. So what is Phase 2? Croft swallowed. She told me Phase 1 was about seeding access, planting backdoors into regional systems, building a library of cloned profiles. Phase 2 is about the main vault. Tonight she plans to breach the National Traveler Database. Not just local records, centralized storage, border entries, airline histories, watch lists, credit links. She wants a copy before the next software update closes holes she mapped. Luke's stomach clenched. You're saying if she succeeds, there will be no way to trust any identity that passes through our checkpoints. It will be worse, Croft replied. You won't see a single dramatic failure. You'll see scattered anomalies, each one small enough to treat as a glitch. Meanwhile, people using her fabricated identities will slip inspection over and over, because every field you rely on will look valid. Kaiser lifted his head now, golden eyes fixed on Croft as if judging him. Luke brushed his fingers along the dog's neck. The familiar warmth steadied him. This, he thought, is why we do this. Not for headlines or commendations, but for crowded boarding lines, for sleeping children on early flights, for strangers who never know how close their routines come to someone else's greed. He did not have a spouse waiting at home or kids drawing pictures of police dogs. He had this mission and the animal who had chosen him and stayed. When people left, if you're still with me inside this room, hearing how close one suitcase came to rewriting the rules for every traveler you know, take a breath and let it sink in. Systems you trust are only as strong as the people defending them. If stories like this make you look at working dogs and tired officers with new respect, hit like, share this with someone who flies often, and tell me in the comments if you've ever seen an animal sense danger before any human did. I read every comment, because your stories prove this fight matters more than any medal. They remind me who I am off duty too. The moment seemed to hold its breath. Then the building's alarm system detonated into sound. A shrill tone cut through the walls, followed by the clipped voice from Central Security. Alert, unauthorized access, Terminal B, multiple system flags. All units respond to Terminal B. This is not a drill. Luke was already pushing back his chair. Kaiser sprang to his feet before any command, his body pointing toward the door like a compass. Croft stared at the ceiling, as the siren wailed. She's moving to Phase 2, he said. She told me if one node failed, she'd pivot midstream. Different wing, same objective. She never retreats, she just finds another path. Luke yanked the door open. An officer waiting in the hall straightened. Watch him, Luke ordered. Record everything he remembers about her entry points. Contacts, anything. Get it to command. Then he and Kaiser were running down the corridor, boots hammering tile, alarms screaming overhead, racing toward Terminal B, where somewhere under the blinking lights, a woman in a red coat was already reaching for the heart of their entire system. They caught her at the far southern edge of the airfield, where taxiways ended in open tarmac. Floodlights carved a circle out of the dark rain slanting sideways in the wind. Jet engines roared from a nearby runway. Inside that harsh ring, Victoria Hale stood alone in her red coat, fabric soaked and clinging. She waited in a service lane between painted lines, shoulders squared, hair flattened, In her hand she held a small black device, no bigger than a phone, a single blue light blinking steadily. Her thumb rested near a recessed button, casual and terrifying at once. Luke stepped from behind a service truck with Kaiser at his side. The leash vibrated between them. The German shepherd's fur lay plastered to his body, tail rigid, ears forward. A low growl rolled from his chest, barely audible under the wind, yet strong enough that Luke felt it through his palm. "Drop the device and raise your hands," Luke shouted over engines and storm. "Now." Victoria turned her head. Her gaze traveled along the semicircle of cruisers in uniforms, then settled on Luke and the dog. "One press," she called back, lifting the device. "And every identity tied into this airport hub leaves with me. Passenger profiles, crew records, payment streams, biometric templates, years of data. In seconds it copies to systems you will never reach." Kaiser's growl deepened. He leaned forward, harness straining, eyes locked on the device. Rain ran off his muzzle. Luke tightened his grip. Boots braced on slick ground. "You do that," Luke said, taking a step closer. "And people whose faces you'll never see spend years trying to reclaim accounts and borders. They never agreed to be inventory. You've taken enough. It stops here." She gave a small, tired smile. "You still believe this is about one operator," she replied. "I mapped weaknesses. Others built markets. Arrest me, smash my tool, and buyers keep trading what I showed them. That's what happens when a system forgets there are people behind its numbers." "Maybe they keep trying," Luke answered, edging nearer, "but they'll do it without you steering them. Tonight you don't get to flip that switch." A nearby aircraft throttled up, sending a blast of air that turned rain into needles. Victoria's coat snapped around her leg. Through the curtain of water, Luke saw her thumb shift closer to the button. Kaiser reacted first. The shepherd exploded forward, ripping the leash from Luke's fingers. Claws bit into wet concrete. As he launched, a blur of soaked fur driving straight at her arm. He crossed the distance in 3 long bounds. Victoria tried to pivot away, bringing the device tight to her chest. Kaiser hit her side, shoulder slamming into ribs. Her boots slipped on paint. As she fell, he adjusted, jaws snapping down on her forearm below the rib. His teeth closed through cloth and skin, crushing muscle, forcing her grip open. The black rectangle flew, spinning end over end. Its blue light flickered faster as it hit the concrete and skittered toward a shallow puddle. Luke sprinted past them. He fixed on the sliding device. Rain blurred his vision. Engines pounded at his ears. Yet that blinking light stayed centered in his focus. He lunged, brought his heel down, and stamped the casing. Plastic cracked. The light flared, then dimmed as he twisted his foot, grinding the housing into the ground. Circuit boards snapped with a brittle crunch. A thin spark jumped and died in the rain. Behind him, Victoria shouted. Kaiser held his bite, growling a harsh snarl. Body braced as she tried to wrench free. She clawed at his face with her free hand, nails scraping his cheek. But he shifted his head, keeping his grip while protecting his eyes, exactly as trained. "Out," Luke ordered. Kaiser released instantly, and sprang back to Luke's side, drenched, flanks heaving, already keyed on her again. Officers surged in. One swept Victoria's legs, sending her down hard. Another dropped a knee between her shoulders, while a third yanked her free arm behind her. Steel cuffs snapped around her wrists with a clear click. When Kaiser moved farther back, a second set locked onto her bitten arm. "It's over, Hale," Ramirez said, catching his breath. "You're done." She knelt in the rain, hair hanging in wet strands. Her eyes moved from the crushed device to Kaiser, then to Luke. "You closed one door," she said. "Do you really think nothing else is open?" "I think tonight a lot of people keep their names," Luke replied. "That's enough for one night." Hours later, the storm still slapped the windows of the Joint Command Center, but inside the sound had shifted to keyboard. Screens covered the walls, showing maps, network graphs, and scrolling logs. Forensic teams had copied every drive, chip and card from Croft's suitcase and Hale's van. Cyber specialists from several agencies leaned over consoles, turning raw dumps into facts. "This cluster holds keys to mirrored databases," one analyst said. pointing at highlighted folders. Not just seat lists. Full identity bundles. Names, dates of birth, biometric hashes, travel histories and payment profiles. Some sets linked to medical and loyalty records. A supervisor asked, "How many?" "Current count sits above 800,000 individuals," the analyst replied. "Source points hit at least 7 countries. If that trigger had fired, scripts on it would have pushed everything to foreign servers in minutes. You wouldn't have known until broken lives started piling up." Another agent displayed a relationship map built from recovered messages and payment paths. Lines radiated from a central profile tagged with Hale's photo, branching into cells in different cities. "She designed the playbook," an Interpol liaison said. "Every major compromise we're seeing traces back to methods she wrote. Cells can imitate pieces, but without her active coordination, they lose reach. Catching her here, with these keys, stopped the next expansion before it started." A communications officer turned from his console. "Interpol is drafting a release," he said. "They're calling this the largest identity theft operation, intercepted at source. Not just shutting down a shop, cutting off the harvest." Across the room, Luke stood with Kaiser sitting at his heel. The dog wore a dry vest now, fur roughened, eyes bright beneath heavy lids. An empty bowl sat beside his paws. Ramirez joined. "All this," he said, nodding toward the screens, "because one wet dog decided a suitcase didn't smell right." Luke looked down. Kaiser looked up, tail thumping once against the tile. "Because he wouldn't back off," Luke said. "A lot of strangers will wake up tomorrow still belonging to themselves." He rested his hand on Kaiser's neck. The shepherd leaned into the touch, steady and solid. Outside, aircraft continued to land and lift, carrying passenger lists full of names that would remain exactly where they belonged, because one dog refused to let evil pass as ordinary luggage. Somewhere beyond the storm, people were booking flights, checking in, and arguing over seats, never knowing how close their lives had come to being rewritten. That ignorance, Luke thought, was the quietest victory of the night, paid for in fur, rain and a single unshakable bar. Kaiser just watched the doors hold. 2 days later, sunlight streamed through the high windows of Terminal 7, turning the polished floor into a sheet of pale gold. The storm had blown out to sea, and with it went the chaos, the sirens, and the sprinting chase across wet concrete. Flights departed on time again. Announcements rolled by in calm, practiced voices. To anyone passing through, it was just another travel day. Luke Harrington stood near the broad glass wall, hands resting loosely on his duty belt, watching a jet lift off and claw its way into the blue. Beside his leg sat Kaiser in his K9 vest, posture relaxed but alert, tail giving a slow, steady thump whenever a child pointed at him. The shepherd's coat had been brushed until it gleamed. A small stitched patch marked the vest with a quiet commendation the chief had insisted on. Kaiser only cared that the harness meant work, and that Luke was close. For the first time in a long while, Luke let himself simply breathe. No alarms, no chase, no blinking device inches from changing 1,000 lives. Just the steady rhythm of departures and arrivals, families reuniting and separating under the bright and different sun. He knew how narrow that peace had been. It made every ordinary moment feel like something sacred. Soft footsteps approached. He heard them hesitate, then stop just behind his boot. Excuse me?" He glanced down. A little girl stood there, maybe 7 years old, clutching the handle of a pink suitcase plastered with stickers. Her hair was braided neatly, and one of her shoelaces had come half undone. She stared at Kaiser with big, careful eyes. "Is that the dog from the news?" she asked, her voice barely above the hum of the terminal. Kaiser's ears flicked. Luke dropped into a crouch so he was at her level. "What do you think?" he said gently. She studied the shepherd, then nodded with the absolute certainty only children have. "He is," she whispered. "My mom showed me the video. He was brave." Luke smiled. "His name is Kaiser," he said. "You can say hello if you want. Just hold out your hand so he can sniff first." The girl extended her small fingers, palm down, heart obviously pounding in her chest. Kaiser leaned forward, inhaled once, then flicked his tongue across her knuckles in a gentle lick. Her whole face lit up, giggles burst out of her before she could stop them. "He likes you," Luke said. Behind her a man stepped closer, rolling a matching suitcase. He looked tired in the way parents traveling with kids always did, but his eyes were glassy. He offered his hand to Luke, grip firm, voice rough. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping us safe, for not letting people like her win." Luke shook his hand and felt something loosen inside his chest that had been clenched since the moment Kaiser first hit that suitcase. "We just did our job," he answered. The man shook his head. "You did more than that," he said quietly. "My sister's identity was stolen a few years ago. Someone emptied her accounts, opened cards, and took loans in her name. She spent months fixing paperwork. I watched what it did to her. When I saw the report about what you stopped," he swallowed. "I just needed to say it. Thank you." He guided his daughter away, the girl waving awkwardly at Kaiser until they disappeared into the crowd. Luke exhaled, then dropped to one knee beside his partner. The dog turned his head, amber eyes focused entirely on him. "They keep thanking me," Luke said under his breath. "They don't understand you're the one who wouldn't give up." He rubbed along Kaiser's neck where the vest met fur. The shepherd leaned into the touch, tail brushing against Luke's boot. "He's the hero," Luke murmured, loud enough that a nearby passerby heard and smiled. "I just hold the leash." Kaiser tilted his head, gaze warm and steady, as if answering a conversation they'd been having for years. In those eyes, Luke saw the night on the tarmac, the hangar, the smashed device, and every alarm that had ever dragged them from routine into danger. He saw something else too. Trust, not blind obedience, but a bond built from 1,000 shared hours, patrol after patrol, breath after breath. If Kaiser could have spoken, Luke knew what he would have said. "We did it together." Sometimes the greatest protectors in the room don't wear pressed uniforms or polished shoes. Sometimes they arrive on 4 padded feet, carrying a nose that never lies, and a heart that drives them forward when every instinct in a human body screams to stop. Pieces of gear get replaced, machines are upgraded, software patched, and cameras improved. A dog like Kaiser gives something different and never asks what it costs. You and I live in a world built on invisible trust, tickets booked with numbers, doors opened by badges, and accounts guarded by data we never touch with our hands. People like Victoria Hale learned to twist that trust. Yet on that day in Terminal 7, it wasn't a firewall or a screen full of code that stood between tens of thousands of travelers and disaster. It was one German shepherd who refused to walk past a suitcase everyone else wanted to ignore. If hearing what he did moved you even a little, and I know it did, do something simple that means more than you think. Tap that like button so this story travels far. Share it with someone who loves dogs, or with anyone who's ever walked through an airport and assumed the systems around them would hold. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your country, your city, the place you call home. I want to see how far Kaiser's story reaches, how many corners of the world get to hear about a dog who decided one ordinary morning would not end like every other day. When you write in, don't just drop a flag. Tell me if there's an animal in your life who ever sensed something you missed or stood between you and harm before you realized anything was wrong. I read every single comment, because tucked between the jokes and emojis are real moments that remind me why these stories matter. They prove that courage isn't limited to action movies or headlines. It lives in living rooms, on farm roads, in crowded terminals and quiet backyards, in the way a dog leans into your leg when your heart is racing for reasons nobody else can see. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. There are more true stories on the way, about loyalty, about ordinary people and extraordinary animals who refuse to look away when danger walks past in a borrowed coat. The next story will leave you speechless, all over again. Until then, stay safe. Take care of the animals who would walk through fire for you. And remember, sometimes the biggest heroes in the room stand barely 2 feet off the ground and answer every crisis with a single bark. See you in the next one.